The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to the Where Our Minds Wander Christmas special. All you fellow wanderers out there.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, and Merry Christmas Eve and Merry Christmas if you celebrate.
Yeah, we're in the Christmas spirit because as we're sitting here in the Where Our Minds Wander studio, the snow is coming down. You can see it through the windows. And it's really pretty out because it's just those nice big snowflakes passing by the lights with the wind blowing, and the limbs on the trees are swaying, and it makes it look as though the lights are flickering with the snow coming down in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful out.
It's very magical.
It is. It's only going to add up to about an inch, and then it's going to be gone tomorrow. But what a beautiful night to record.
Mm-hmm. And we have two great spooky stories for you tonight. We had said last week that we were going to continue our tradition of telling some creepy Christmas ghost stories, just like the Victorians used to do on Christmas Eve. And the two stories that we're sharing with you tonight were published in 1904. And they're pretty good.
They're more than pretty good. They're really good.
They're very good.
I loved reading through these.
Yeah.
And we know that this is going to be dropping on Christmas Eve, so we don't want to keep you all waiting. So why don't you head into the fridge, get yourself some eggnog, maybe put some rum or bourbon in it.
Or some hot chocolate with a little something extra in it.
Yeah.
Marshmallows, peppermint sticks. Those types of things.
Yeah, the kids used to always love putting candy canes into their hot chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
They were so tickled pink about it. It's so good, Daddy. And maybe dim the lights, get into your favorite comfy chair or couch, and sit back, and we're going to tell you some ghost stories for Christmas.
So mine is called The Doll's Ghost, and it's by F. Marion Crawford. It was a terrible accident, and for one moment the splendid machinery of Cranston House got out of gear and stood still. The butler emerged from the retirement in which he spent his elegant leisure. Two grooms of the chambers appeared simultaneously from opposite directions. There were actually housemaids on the grand staircase, and those who remember the facts most exactly assert that Mrs. Pringle herself positively stood upon the landing. Mrs. Pringle was the housekeeper. As for the head nurse, the under nurse, and the nursery maid, their feelings cannot be described. The head nurse laid one hand upon the polished marble balustrade and stared stupidly before her. The under nurse stood rigid and pale, leaning against the polished marble wall. And the nursery maid collapsed and sat down upon the polished marble step just beyond the limits of the velvet carpet, and frankly burst into tears. The Lady Gwendolen Lancaster Douglas Scroop, youngest daughter of the 9th Duke of Cranston, aged 6 years and 3 months, picked herself up quite alone and sat down on the 3rd step from the foot of the grand staircase in Cranston House. "Oh," said the butler, and he disappeared again. "Ah," responded the grooms of the chambers, as they also went away. "It's only that doll," Mrs. Pringle was distinctly heard to say, in a tone of contempt. The under-nurse heard her say it. Then the 3 nurses gathered round Lady Gwendolen and patted her and gave her unhealthy things out of their pockets and hurried her out of Cranston House as fast as they could, lest it should be found out upstairs that they had allowed the Lady Gwendolen Lancaster Douglas Scroop to tumble down the grand staircase with her doll in her arms. And as the doll was badly broken, the nursery maid carried it, with the pieces, wrapped up in Lady Gwendolen's little cloak. It was not far to Hyde Park, and when they reached a quiet place, they took means to find out that Lady Gwendolen had no bruises. For the carpet was very thick and soft, and there was thick stuff under it to make it softer. Lady Gwendolen Douglas Scroop sometimes yelled, but she never cried. It was because she had yelled that the nurse had allowed her to go downstairs alone with Nina, the doll, under one arm, while she steadied herself with her other hand on the balustrade and trod upon the polished marble steps beyond the edge of the carpet. So she had fallen, and Nina had come to grief. When the nurses were quite sure that she was not hurt, they unwrapped the doll and looked at her in turn. She had been a very beautiful doll, very large and fair and healthy, with real yellow hair and eyelids that would open and shut over very grown-up dark eyes. Moreover, when you moved her right arm up and down, she said, "Papa," and when you moved the left, she said, "Mama," very distinctly. "I heard her say 'Pa' when she fell," said the under-nurse, who heard everything, "but she ought to have said 'Pa.' "That's because her arm went up when she hit the step," said the head nurse. "She'll say the other 'Pa' when I put it down again." "Pa," said Nina, as her right arm was pushed down, and speaking through her broken face. It was cracked right across, from the upper corner of the forehead, with a hideous gash, through the nose, and down to the little frilled collar of the pale green silk Mother Hubbard frock, and 2 little 3-cornered pieces of porcelain had fallen out. "I'm sure it's a wonder she can speak at all, being all smashed," said the under-nurse. "You'll have to take her to Mr. Puckler," said her superior. "It's not far, and you'd better go at once." Lady Gwendolen was occupied in digging a hole in the ground with a little spade, and paid no attention to her nurses. "What are you doing?" inquired the nursery maid, looking on. "Nina's dead, and I'm digging her a grave," replied her ladyship thoughtfully. "Oh, she'll come to life again all right," said the nursery maid. The under-nurse wrapped Nina up again and departed. Fortunately, a kind soldier with very long legs and a very small cap happened to be there, and as he had nothing to do, he offered to see the under-nurse safely to Mr. Puckler's and back. Mr. Bernard Puckler and his little daughter lived in a little house in a little alley, which led off a quiet little street not very far from Belgrave Square. He was the great doll doctor, and his extensive practice lay in the most aristocratic quarter. He mended dolls of all sizes and ages, boy dolls and girl dolls, baby dolls in long clothes, and grown-up dolls in fashionable gowns. Talking dolls and dumb dolls, those that shut their eyes when they lay down, and those whose eyes had to be shut for them by means of a mysterious wire. His daughter Elsa was only just over 12 years old, but she was already very clever at mending dolls' clothes and doing their hair, which, is harder than you might think, though the dolls sit quite still while it's being done. Mr. Puckler had originally been a German, but he had dissolved his nationality in the ocean of London many years ago, like a great many foreigners. He still had one or two German friends, however, who came on Saturday evenings and smoked with him and played piquet or scat with him for farthing points and called him Herr Doctor, which seemed to please Mr. Puckler very much. He looked older than he was, for his beard was rather long and ragged, his hair was grizzled and thin, and he wore horn-rimmed spectacles. As for Elsa, she was a thin, pale child, very quiet and neat, with dark eyes and brown hair that was plaited down her back and tied with a bit of black ribbon. She mended the dolls' clothes and took the dolls back to their homes when they were quite strong again. The house was a little one, but too big for the two people who lived in it. There was a small sitting room on the street, and the workshop was at the back, and there were 3 rooms upstairs. But the father and daughter lived most of their time in the workshop, because they were generally at work, even in the evenings. Mr. Puckler laid Nina on the table and looked at her for a long time, till the tears began to fill his eyes behind the horn-rimmed spectacles. He was a very susceptible man, and he often fell in love with the dolls he mended, and found it hard to part with them when they had smiled at him for a few days. They were real little people to him, with characters and thoughts and feelings of their own, and he was very tender with all of them. But some attracted him especially from the first, and when they were brought to him maimed and injured, their state seemed so pitiful to him that the tears came easily. You must remember that he had lived among dolls during a great part of his life and understood them. "How do you know that they feel nothing?" he went on to say to Elsa. "You must be gentle with them. It costs nothing to be kind to the little beings, and perhaps it makes a difference to them." And Elsa understood him because she was a child, and she knew that she was more to him than all of the dolls. He fell in love with Nina at first sight, perhaps because her beautiful brown glass eyes were something like Elsa's own, and he loved Elsa first and best with all of his heart. And besides, it was a very sorrowful case. Nina had evidently not been long in the world, for her complexion was perfect. Her hair was smooth where it should be smooth, and curly where it should be curly, and her silk clothes were perfectly new. But across her face was that frightful gash, like a saber cut, deep and shadowy within, but clean and sharp at the edges. When he tenderly pressed her head to close the gaping wound, the edges made a fine grating sound that was painful to hear, and the lids of the dark eyes quivered and trembled as though Nina were suffering dreadfully. "Poor Nina," he exclaimed sorrowfully, "but I shall not hurt you much, though you will take a long time to get you strong." He always asked the names of the broken dolls when they were brought to him, and sometimes the people knew what the children called them and told him. He liked Nina for a name. Altogether and in every way she pleased him more than any doll he had seen for many years, and he felt drawn to her and made up his mind to make her perfectly strong and sound, no matter how much labor it might cost him. Mr. Puckler worked patiently, a little at a time, and Elsa watched him. She could do nothing for poor Nina, whose clothes needed no mending. The longer the doll doctor worked, the more fond he became of the yellow hair and the beautiful brown glass eyes. He sometimes forgot all the other dolls that were waiting to be mended, lying side by side on a shelf, and sat for an hour gazing at Nina's face while he racked his ingenuity for some new invention by which to hide even the smallest trace of the terrible accident. She was wonderfully mended. He was even obliged to admit that, but the scar was still visible to his keen eyes, a very fine line right across the face, downwards from right to left. Yet all the conditions had been most favorable for a cure, since the cement had set quite hard at the first attempt, and the weather had been fine and dry, which makes a great difference in a doll's hospital. At last he knew that he could do no more, and the under-nurse had already come twice to see whether the job was finished, as she coarsely expressed it. "Nina is not quite strong yet," Mr. Puckler had answered each time, for he could not make up his mind to face the parting. And now he sat before the square deal table at which he worked, and Nina lay before him for the last time with a big brown paper box beside her. It stood there like her coffin, waiting for her, he thought. He must put her into it and lay tissue paper over her dear face, and then put on the lid, and at the thought of tying the string his sight was dim with tears again. He was never to look into the glassy depths of the beautiful brown eyes any more, nor to hear the little voice say, "Papa," and "Mama." It was a very painful moment. In the vague hope of gaining time before the separation, he took up the little sticky bottles of cement and glue and gum and color, looking at each one in turn, and then at Nina's face. And all his small tools lay there neatly arranged in a row, but he knew that he could not use them again for Nina. She was quite strong at last, and in a country where there should be no cruel children to hurt her, she might live 100 years, with only that almost imperceptible line across her face to tell of the fearful thing that had befallen her on the marble steps of Cranston House. Suddenly, Mr. Puckler's heart was quite full, and he rose abruptly from his seat and turned away. "Elsa," he said unsteadily, "you must do it for me. I cannot bear to see her go into the box." So he went and stood at the window with his back turned, while Elsa did what he had not the heart to do. "Is it done?" he asked, not turning round. "Then take her away, my dear. Put on your hat and take her to Cranston House quickly, and when you are gone I will turn round." Elsa was used to her father's strange ways with the dolls, and though she had never seen him so much moved by a parting, she was not much surprised. "Come back quickly," he said, when he heard her hand on the latch. "It is growing late, and I should not send you at this hour, but I cannot bear to look forward to it any more." When Elsa was gone, he left the window and sat down in his place before the table again, to wait for the child to come back. He touched the place where Nina had lain, very gently, and he recalled the softly tinted pink face and the glass eyes and the ringlets of yellow hair, till he could almost see them. The evenings were long, for it was late in the spring, but it began to grow dark soon, and Mr. Puckler wondered why Elsa did not come back. She had been gone an hour and a half, and that was much longer than he had expected, for it was barely half a mile from Belgrave Square to Cranston House. He reflected that the child might have been kept waiting, but as the twilight deepened, he grew anxious and walked up and down in the dim workshop, no longer thinking of Nina, but of Elsa, his own living child, whom he greatly loved. An undefinable, disquieting sensation came upon him by fine degrees, a chilliness and a faint stirring of his thin hair, joined with a wish to be in any company rather than be alone much longer. It was the beginning of fear. He told himself in strong German English that he was a foolish old man, and he began to feel about for the matches in the dusk. He knew just where they should be, for he always kept them in the same place, close to the little tin box that held bits of sealing wax of various colors for some kind of mending. But somehow he could not find the matches in the gloom. Something had happened to Elsa. He was sure of it, and as his fear increased, he felt as though it might be allayed if he could get a light and see what time it was. Then he called himself a foolish old man again, and the sound of his own voice startled him in the dark. He could not find the matches. The window was gray still. He might see what time it was if he went close to it, and he could go and get matches out of the cupboard afterwards. He stood back from the table to get out of the way of the chair and began to cross the board floor. But something was following him in the dark. There was a small pattering, as of tiny feet upon the boards. He stopped and listened, and the roots of his hair tingled. It was nothing, and he was a foolish old man. He made 2 steps more, and he was sure that he heard the little pattering again. He turned his back to the window, leaning against the sash so that the panes began to crack, and he faced the dark. Everything was quite still, and it smelt of paste and cement and wood filings as usual. "Is that you, Elsa?" he asked, and he was surprised by the fear in his voice. There was no answer in the room, and he held up his watch and tried to make out what time it was by the gray dusk that was just not darkness. So far as he could see, it was within 2 or 3 minutes of 10 o'clock. He had been a long time alone. He was shocked and frightened for Elsa out in London so late, and he almost ran across the room to the door. As he fumbled for the latch, he distinctly heard the running of little feet after him. "Mice!" he exclaimed feebly, just as he got the door open. He shut it quickly behind him and felt as though some cold thing had settled on his back and were writhing upon him. The passage was quite dark, but he found his hat and was out in the alley in a moment, breathing more freely, and surprised to find how much light there still was in the open air. He could see the pavement clearly under his feet, and far off in the street to which the alley led, he could hear the laughter and calls of children playing some game out of doors. He wondered how he could have been so nervous, and for an instant he thought of going back into the house to wait quietly for Elsa. But instantly he felt that nervous fright of something stealing over him again. In any case, it was better to walk up to Cranston House and ask the servants about the child. One of the women had perhaps taken a fancy to her and was even now giving her tea and cake. He walked quickly to Belgrave Square and then up the broad streets, listening as he went, whenever there was no other sound, for the tiny footsteps. But he heard nothing and was laughing at himself when he rang the servant's bell at the big house. Of course the child must be there. The person who opened the door was quite an inferior person, for it was a back door, but affected the manners of the front, and stared at Mr. Puckler superciliously under the strong light. No little girl had been seen, and he knew nothing about no dolls. "She is my little girl," said Mr. Puckler tremulously, for all his anxiety was returning tenfold, "and I am afraid something has happened." The inferior person said rudely that nothing could have happened to her in that house because she had not been there, which was jolly good reason why. And Mr. Puckler was obliged to admit that the man ought to know, as it was his business to keep the door and let people in. He wished to be allowed to speak to the under-nurse, who knew him, but the man was ruder than ever and finally shut the door in his face. When the doll doctor was alone in the street, he steadied himself by the railing, for he felt as though he were breaking in two, just as some dolls break in the middle of the backbone. Presently he knew that he must be doing something to find Elsa, and that gave him strength. He began to walk as quickly as he could through the streets, following every highway and byway which his little girl might have taken on her errand. He also asked several policemen in vain if they had seen her, and most of them answered him kindly, for they saw that he was a sober man and in his right senses, and some of them had little girls of their own. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when he went up to his own door again, worn out and hopeless and broken-hearted. As he turned the key in the lock, his heart stood still, for he knew that he was awake and not dreaming, and that he really heard those tiny footsteps pattering to meet him inside the house along the passage. But he was too unhappy to be much frightened any more, and his heart went out again with a dull, regular pain that found its way all through him with every pulse. So he went in and hung up his hat in the dark and found the matches in the cupboard and the candlestick in its place in the corner. Mr. Puckler was so much overcome and so completely worn out that he sat down in his chair before the work table and almost fainted as his face dropped forward upon his folded hands. Beside him, the solitary candle burned steadily with a low flame in the still warm air. "Elsa, Elsa," he moaned against his yellow knuckles. And that was all he could say, and it was no relief to him. On the contrary, the very sound of the name was a new and sharp pain that pierced his ears and his head and his very soul. For every time he repeated the name, it meant that little Elsa was dead, somewhere out in the streets of London in the dark. He was so terribly hurt that he did not even feel something pulling gently at the skirt of his old coat, so gently that it was like the nibbling of a tiny mouse. He might have thought that it was really a mouse if he had noticed it. "Elsa, Elsa," he groaned right against his hands. Then a cool breath stirred his thin hair, and the low flame of the one candle dropped down almost to a mere spark, not flickering as though a drought were going to blow it out, but just dropping down as if it were tired out. Mr. Puckler felt his hands stiffening with fright under his face, and there was a faint rustling sound like some small silk thing blown in a gentle breeze. He sat up straight, stark and scared, and a small wooden voice spoke in the stillness. "Pa," it said, with a break between the syllables. Mr. Puckler stood up in a single jump, and his chair fell over backwards with a smashing noise upon the wooden floor. The candle had almost gone out. It was Nina's doll's voice that had spoken, and he should have known it among the voices of 100 other dolls. And yet there was something more in it, a little human ring, with a pitiful cry and a call for help, and the wail of a hurt child. Mr. Puckler stood up, stark and stiff, and tried to look round, but at first he could not, for he seemed to be frozen from head to foot. Then he made a great effort, and he raised one hand to each of his temples and pressed his own head round as he would have turned a doll's. The candle was burning so low that it might as well have been out altogether for any light that it gave, and the room seemed quite dark at first. Then he saw something. He would not have believed that he could be more frightened than he had been just before that, but he was, and his knees shook, for he saw the doll standing in the middle of the floor, shining with a faint and ghostly radiance, her beautiful glassy brown eyes fixed on his. And across her face, the very thin line of the break he had mended shone as though it were drawn in light with a fine point of white flame. Yet there was something more in the eyes, too. There was something human, like Elsa's own, but as if only the doll saw him through them and not Elsa. And there was enough of Elsa to bring back all his pain and to make him forget his fear. "Elsa, my little Elsa!" he cried aloud. The small ghost moved, and its doll arm slowly rose and fell with a stiff, mechanical motion. "Papa," it said. It seemed this time that there was even more of Elsa's tone echoing somewhere between the wooden notes that reached his ears so distinctly, and yet so far away. Elsa was calling him. He was sure. His face was perfectly white in the gloom, but his knees did not shake any more, and he felt that he was less frightened. "Yes, child, but where? Where?" he asked. "Where are you, Elsa?" "Papa." The syllables died away in the quiet room. There was a low rustling of silk, the glassy brown eyes turned slowly away, and Mr. Puckler heard the pitter-patter of the small feet in the bronze kid slippers as the figure ran straight to the door. Then the candle burned high again, the room was full of light, and he was alone. Mr. Puckler passed his hand over his eyes and looked about him. He could see everything quite clearly, and he felt that he must have been dreaming, though he was standing instead of sitting down, as he should have been if he had just waked up. The candle burned brightly now. There were the dolls to be mended, lying in a row with their toes up. The third one had lost her right shoe, and Elsa was making one. He knew that, and he was certainly not dreaming now. He had not been dreaming when he had come in from his fruitless search and had heard the doll's footsteps running to the door. He had not fallen asleep in his chair. How could he possibly have fallen asleep when his heart was breaking? He had been awake all the time. He steadied himself, set the fallen chair upon its legs, and said to himself again very emphatically that he was a foolish old man. He ought to be out in the streets, looking for his child, asking questions, and inquiring at the police stations, where all accidents were reported as soon as they were known, or at the hospitals. "Papa!" The longing, wailing, pitiful little wooden cry rang from the passage outside the door, and Mr. Puckler stood for an instant with white face, transfixed and rooted to the spot. A moment later, his hand was on the latch. Then he was in the passage, with the light streaming from the open door behind him. Quite at the other end, he saw the little phantom shining clearly in the shadow, and the right hand seemed to beckon to him as the arm rose and fell once more. He knew, all at once, that it had not come to frighten him, but to lead him, And when it disappeared and he walked boldly towards the door, he knew that it was in the street outside, waiting for him. He forgot that he was tired and had eaten no supper and had walked many miles, for a sudden hope ran through him like a golden stream of life. And sure enough, at the corner of the alley and at the corner of the street and out in Belgrave Square, he saw the small ghost flitting before him. Sometimes it was only a shadow when there was other light, but then the glare of the lamps made a pale green sheen on its little Mother Hubbard frock of silk. And sometimes where the streets were dark and silent, the whole figure shone out brightly with its yellow curls and rosy neck. It seemed to trot along like a tiny child, and Mr. Puckler could almost hear the pattering of the bronze kid slippers on the pavement as it ran. But it went very fast, and he could only just keep up with it, tearing along with his hat on the back of his head and his thin hair blown by the night breeze, and his horn-rimmed spectacles firmly set upon his broad nose. On and on he went, and he had no idea where he was. He did not even care, for he knew certainly that he was going the right way. Then, at last, in a wide, quiet street, he was standing before a big, sober-looking door that had 2 lamps on each side of it, a polished brass bell handle, which he pulled. And just inside, when the door was opened, in the bright light, there was the little shadow, and the pale green sheen of the little silk dress, and once more the small cry came to his ears, less pitiful, more longing. "Papa." The shadow turned suddenly bright, and out of the brightness the beautiful brown glass eyes were turned up happily to his, while the rosy mouth smiled so divinely that the phantom doll looked almost like a little angel just then. "A little girl was brought in soon after 10 o'clock, said the quiet voice of the hospital doorkeeper. "I think they thought she was only stunned. She was holding a big brown paper box against her, and they could not get it out of her arms. She had a long plait of brown hair that hung down as they carried her." "She is my little girl," said Mr. Puckler, but he hardly heard his own voice. He leaned over Elsa's face in the gentle light of the children's ward. And when he had stood there a minute, the beautiful brown eyes opened and looked up to his. "Papa," cried Elsa softly, "I knew you would come." Then Mr. Puckler did not know what he did or said for a moment, and what he felt was worth all the fear and terror and despair that had almost killed him that night. But by and by Elsa was telling her story, and the nurse let her speak, for there were only 2 other children in the room who were getting well and were sound asleep. "They were big boys with bad faces," said Elsa, "and they tried to get Nina away from me, but I held on and fought as well as I could till one of them hit me with something. And I don't remember any more, for I tumbled down. And I suppose the boys ran away, and somebody found me there. But I'm afraid Nina is all smashed." "Here is the box," said the nurse. "We could not take it out of her arms till she came to herself. Should you like to see if the doll is broken?" And she undid the string cleverly, but Nina was all smashed to pieces. Only the gentle light of the children's ward made a pale green sheen in the folds of the little Mother Hubbard frock.
And we'll return after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? In 1955, Sears ran an ad inviting children to call Santa Claus. What they didn't realize was that a typo in the number sent the children's calls to the Continental Air Defense Command, the predecessor to NORAD. In response, CONAD began tracking Santa for the delighted children, giving each caller a magical update on just where exactly Santa was in the world. Today, as you may know, NORAD continues the tradition, using satellites, radar, and social media to let millions of children follow Santa each Christmas Eve. A misprint by Sears turned into one of the coolest and most beloved traditions for many families on Christmas Eve. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we are back from the break, and let's continue on with part 2 of our Christmas special. 2:30 by Marjorie Bowen. The light had been put out on the stairs. Usually when he returned late to spend the night in his rooms, he found it burning. Now he would have to make his way slowly, striking matches as he went up the old, dingy, enclosed stairs. It was a long time since he had spent the night in this house, and he did not greatly care about doing so. It was an ancient, inconvenient residence, hidden away in a small square which had been half demolished, and was hemmed in on either side by massive modern buildings. Only when, as now, the young man had been detained so late at a dance that he had missed the last train to his home in the country, did he resort to the expedient of spending the night in this makeshift fashion. Roger Hobie knew that he would be alone in the house, as he always was when he spent the night there, with a great many other empty houses to the right and left of him. And there was something in the silence more oppressive than the silence of the open country. So many buildings around him, so busy and crowded in the day, at night so empty and silent. And he blamed the caretaker who had not left the old-fashioned gas, for there was no electric in the house, burning on the stairs. So heavy was the sense of oppression on him that he decided the next night he had to pass into town, that he would be in a hotel. He found his own door, opened it, and entered the suite of chambers he occupied on the second floor, lit the gas in the first room, and passed into the second, which he used as an architect's office. It was a hateful, raw, cold, and foggy night, and Roger Hobie was shuddering and shivering from having passed through the bitter, bleak streets and the damp cold of the dark stairway. He was therefore pleasantly amazed when he felt the genial warmth that met him as he opened the second door and saw the room full of his own familiar and pleasant possessions, brightly illuminated by the glow of a large fire. As he had not been there since the afternoon, he wondered who could have made up such a large fire to last this late hour. The caretaker was seldom in the building after 6. Even as Hobie wondered, he noticed that somebody was sitting in the large armchair drawn up by the fireplace. A man whose dark shape appeared to be one with that of the chair, and was outlined against the bright blaze of the coals. "Hello?" cried Hobie, considerably startled, and not without an odd creep of fear in his blood, and more than ordinary amazement. The figure did not move. One hand was hanging over the edge of the armchair, and Hobie noticed that it was a strange-shaped hand with long, splayed-ended fingers. Roger Hobie, advancing with considerable effort of will, almost laughed out loud with relief when he saw that the man whom he had seen sitting before the fire was Durrant Loveday, who occupied the rooms above his. He was a man with whom Hobie had no more than the most casual acquaintance, and for whom he did not greatly care. It was more than odd to find him sitting there at this hour. "Oh, it's you," said Loveday, and he seemed as relieved to see Hobie as Hobie had been to see him. "What do you want?" asked Roger briefly. "I didn't know you ever spent the night here. How did you get in?" I don't ever spend the night here, replied Durrant Loveday quickly. This is the first time I have ever been here late. But then, you see, I have an appointment. An appointment here at this hour? Yes, it sounds strange, doesn't it? Roger Hobie thought it sounded very strange. He wondered that he had never noticed before that Loveday had such ugly, splayed fingers. But then, he had never given him more than the most cursory glance on the stairs or in the street. He knew nothing at all about this fellow, and he had never liked the thin, dry face, the eyes that were too pale, too deeply cut, and deeply set. All he knew of Loveday was that he was also an architect, and appeared to have an income independent of his work, which amounted to very little as far as Hobie knew. Well, you didn't make an appointment here, I suppose, said Hobie, warming himself before the fire, which his uninvited guests had kept so generously piled with coal. No, it was because I decided not to keep my appointment that I came here, replied the other. Someone was coming back for me, but I didn't want to see him. How did you get in? I slipped in before the clerk went. I hid, and he went and left me locked in. Did he? Thought Hobie. I'm glad you've come back, said Loveday in a confidential tone, leaning forward from the armchair. I've been here for hours, and I'm glad of your company. I kept on piling up the fire to make a bright light, but still I am glad of your company. Well, I can't keep you company, replied Hobie. I want to go to bed. It must be 2:00. Loveday put up his hand. His thick finger ends traveled over his thin lips, and those pale, deep-set eyes gazed at Hobie with an expression that the young man had never seen in a human face before, one of absolute terror. Why, you're afraid, cried Hobie involuntarily. I've got an appointment, muttered Loveday, at 2:30. Hobie went to his cupboard and set out the whiskey and soda. Look here, he said in a voice that he tried to make as practical as possible. You'd better tell me what this is all about. You seem to have lost your nerve a bit, haven't you? What are you doing here, really? Hiding? There's someone coming back to see me at 2:30, cried Loveday. Someone who I have been avoiding for years. Then why on earth, asked Hobie, did you make an appointment with him in such a place and at such an hour? He forced me, said Loveday, his voice falling to a whimper. He forced me to it. You don't know what power he's got over me. I met him in the street, and then in a restaurant, but that wouldn't do. He would come here at 2:30. I didn't make the appointment. He did. He told me 2:30 today, and I'll be there. He came and went without saying anything except, I'll be back at 2:30 tonight. How is he going to get in? Asked Hobie. I closed the door behind me. He forced me to give him the passkey, said Loveday. He'll get in all right. But his voice dropped to an accent of cunning. He'll go upstairs to the offices overhead. He won't think of looking for me here. And I'm locked in, aren't I? Yes, I shut the door, said Hobie doubtfully. He took a drink and gave one to Loveday, who, however, refused it. You had better tell me what it's all about, hadn't you? It would be a very long story, grinned Loveday. There's a great deal in it. In fact, there's everything in it. Then, seeing that Hobie had taken up some matches, he cried out, Don't light the gas. He'll know there's somebody here then, and he might try to get in. But he can't, replied Hobie briefly, and we're 2-1 if he does. You don't know Stiffkey, said Loveday, still with a grin. Hobie put down the box of matches. The room was sufficiently illuminated by the fire, and it occurred to him that if anyone did come, He would judge by firelight as easily as by gaslight that the room was occupied. He did not, however, mention this to Loveday. He had come to his own conclusions about him, the usual conclusions that the ordinary man comes to when faced with anything strange or extraordinary. He thought that Loveday was ill or out of his mind. "Well," he remarked soothingly, "you can have a shake down here all night if you like. I sleep in the other room. There's a sofa there, too, if you would like it." But Loveday said no. He preferred to sit by the fire. He looked at the clock on the mantelpiece, which now showed 10 minutes past 2. No one will come, of course, thought Roger Holby. The man's been badly scared by something, and this is the way it's taken him. He imagined an appointment with an enemy, but no one would come to such a place and at such a time. Observing again that snarl of terror on Loveday's face, he was, however, himself slightly affected by the fear, and said, "You had better really tell me something of what it's about, if you want me to stand by you in this, you know." "I robbed Stiffkey," confessed Loveday, "years ago when we were in Africa. He entrusted me with something of his to sell, stones, and I brought them over to England and gave them to a jeweler to value, and then I told him that the jeweler had absconded with them. Of course, I had sold them and kept the money. That was the beginning of better times for me. I thought Stiffkey had died in Africa. I didn't hear from him for years." "Hush! What was that?" He paused to listen, and Hobie listened too, but there was no sound in the empty house. "It sounds a pretty rotten sort of trick," said Hobie, drinking his whiskey and soda. "I wonder you care to talk about it?" "There are other things," said Loveday. "We were great enemies, but for years I haven't seen him. I haven't thought about him until I met him just the other day, and he insisted upon this appointment, to settle scores, he said. I offered him money, a great deal of money, but he said that money wouldn't pay for all those years." "Hush! I do think that's his step on the stairs." "It isn't," said Hobie impatiently. "There is no sound of anything. It's too silent." He went to the window. "The fog is quite thick," he added. "He'll find his way through the fog all right," answered Loveday faintly. "He means to have his vengeance." "Vengeance?" repeated Hobie. "Do you think he'll come here to revenge himself on you?" "Of course," said Loveday, huddling himself together. "He's always said he'd get me in the end." "Well, I shouldn't have met him in this place, and at this time of night," replied Hobie, trying to speak with more confidence than he felt. He also found himself straining his ears to catch the possible sound of a footstep on the stairs, a rap or a voice at the door. "He would come," whimpered Loveday. "It's his own fault. He would come. Nothing else would do for him. And I was in his power, wasn't I?" "I'll be back," he said, "at 2:30 tonight." Roger Hobie shuddered and drew nearer to the fire. He didn't want to go to bed after all. He thought he'd prefer to sit up with Loveday, not to leave him anyhow until after 2:30. The clock now showed 20 minutes past that hour. Hobie had no compassion for him. He had never liked the man, who, on his own showing, deserved no friendship or respect from anyone. A thief, a traitor, and a coward. No, Hobie had no compassion for him. But he was drawn to him by a stronger link than compassion, that of terror. He was infected by the fear that Loveday gave out, fear that was so definite that it seemed another personality in the room, and one that had laid its grips on Hobie, who was seized by this terror that had seized Loveday, and shuddering and dreading whoever it was, this Stiffkey who was coming at 2:30. So strongly and suddenly did this terror overwhelm him that he made an impulsive movement towards the clock to stop the hands. Loveday, watching him, grinned. "I thought of that," he said, "but it's no use. There are other clocks outside." "Look here," said Hobie roughly, trying to keep up his own courage. "This is all nonsense, you know. You're imagining the whole thing. Nobody's coming, and even if they did—" Loveday interrupted, more by his movement and clutch on the arm of the chair and the look on his face, than by anything he said, though he did mutter for a third time, "Hush." "It sounds like the front door," said Hobie, opening and closing. "Can't you hear it?" whispered Loveday. "There's someone coming up the stairs." "No, I can't," said Hobie roughly. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 2:30. "Warmth, warmth," cried Loveday. "I want to get warm." He pulled his chair up to the fire, so closely it seemed that he must scorch. Hobie went into the outer room and listened. That shivering man was afraid of murder. There certainly was someone coming up the stairs, slowly and deliberately, as if unhindered by the dark. Hobie, moved by some unaccountable impulse of dread, saw that his own door was secure, and then he returned to where Loveday crouched lower and lower over the fire. Hobie could still hear the footsteps, slow and deliberate. Had Stiffkey come with the purpose of murder? Hobie looked around. He did not know why, for a weapon, and picked up a heavy stone paperweight, which had been laid carelessly on the chimney-piece to hold down a few odd papers beside the clock. He found it was wet. He dropped it, and holding his fingers into the firelight, he saw they were red. "What's this? Blood?" cried Hobie. Loveday began to laugh. "Did you hear a footstep?" 2:30, exactly to his appointment. Hobie could hear the footsteps. They had passed the door now. He could hear them overhead, tramping to and fro. He had struck a match and was staring at the chimney-piece. The papers underneath the paperweight were splashed and splattered with red. A thin dark line was running down the wall. Hobie, looking up, saw that it was coming from a patch on the plastered ceiling, exactly where it met the wall, a patch that seemed to be spreading as he looked. Loveday's room was exactly overhead by the dark patch on the plaster. "Up in your room?" whispered Hobie, dropping the flaring match. "Stiffkey," grinned Loveday, staring. "Stiffkey." "And who else?" whispered Hobie. "Only Stiffkey," said Loveday. The steps were again crossing the room overhead and coming down the stairs. The two men listened, bending closer and closer together. Loveday farther and farther, leaning towards the fire. The footsteps paused at the outer door, and there was a sharp rap. "I won't let him in," whispered Hobie. "It doesn't matter whether you do or not," whimpered Loveday. "The door's open." "No, I shut the door." But even as the young man spoke, he felt a draft of cold outer air. Driven by panic, he went into the outer room. The door, which he was certain that he had closed, stood open on the black staircase. The sound of footsteps had departed in the direction of Loveday, but he saw no one. Then he heard Loveday from behind give him a gurgle and a shriek of incredible anguish, and he did not dare go back to the fire. He knew that it was useless to do so, that Loveday was dead. It was quite a long time before he was able to return to the room, light the gas, and stare at Loveday rigid in his chair beneath that red patch of the ceiling. Hobie had known that he would be there alone. The fog was now so thick that even with the gaslight, everything looked dim, monstrous, and misshapen. Torn by fearful curiosity, Roger Hobie went up into Loveday's chambers, and they were not locked. Hobie, striking matches, found what he expected to find, a dead man lying by the wainscot, who had been battered to death by the poker which laid beside him. His watch was staring on the floor beside him. It had stopped at 2:30, which must have been the hour when Loveday murdered him. The appointment was for 2:30, but in the afternoon, not in the night. He had said he would return, but who was the other? For whom had Loveday waited all those hours, first upstairs and then hiding down in Hobie's room? Stiffkey, returning to keep his second appointment again, the next time the clock was at 2:30?
That's a great story. It has everything.
I love this story, but this story was written in the early 1900s, which they worded things much differently back then.
Yes, even the way they formed their sentences, they put things in the beginnings of sentences that we would have put at the end. And
right.
Yes.
And it makes it a little difficult to read it in this modern mouth of mine.
But it's still a great story. You did a great job. I mean, Loveday is creepy and Stiffkey is dead, and yet he's coming back to get his revenge. I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah, it's really cool to take an old story like this and make it come alive.
Yes.
And I now have a really great appreciation for these radio people that could stand up and do stories like this.
With all the sound effects and everything. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the thing about some of these stories is that they're meant to be read out loud. Like when you read them to yourself, they're okay. But then when you hear them out loud, that's how they were meant to be heard,
Yeah.
And I have to say, I liked my story too, because in the beginning, you think that Nina is an evil doll and she pushed Gwendolyn down the stairs. But then at the end, you realize that Nina is just trying to protect all of the different children that she comes in contact with. And she was trying to tell the doll doctor that, Elsa was in the hospital and needed him.
Yeah, she was more like her guardian angel.
Yeah.
If anything else. It seems as though when he was fixing the doll and the little girl was there doing the best that she could, what little she could do, that this doll really took a liking to her. And she helped her out in the end.
Yeah, it's a great story.
I love all the old stories.
I know.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yes, we hope you liked the two stories as well, and you were able to sit down for a little while and, just kind of relax and listen to some spooky stories while you enjoyed your hot cocoa or your hot toddy or whatever you might be in the mood for.
And we want to take a moment to thank all you fellow wanderers out there for your support over this past year and helping us grow and sticking with us and all those comments. And
yes, absolutely.
We really appreciate them.
Yes, you've made a big difference for us this year.
And Beth and I are both glad that you all are a part of the Wanderers family. So we hope you have a Merry Christmas
and a happy
holiday.
Happy New Year.
And that you are all safe. And we'll see you all again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you then. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.